I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today, I have my special guest. He's award-winning author and, of course, best-selling author too. No other than Mr. Alex Schwartzman.
Hi, thank you for having me again. I'm glad to be speaking to you, about my books.
Yes, and welcome back, Mr. Alex. And can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Alex Schwartzman. I am a writer, anthologist, translator, and editor from Brooklyn, New York. I write primarily humor, but I also edit all kinds of different anthologies on a variety of subjects. I have about 15 anthologies and three novels published, as well as over 120 short stories in various anthologies and magazines.
Can you give us a criteria in selecting your authors to be part of your short stories?
So when you start working on an anthology, at first you want to invite a number of core authors or headliners. These are the authors who are already well known and have large followings, and some people will buy the book just to get their story. So you start looking into who are the popular authors that might want to work with you, but that also write the kind of stories that you want. So if it's an urban fantasy anthology, I will ask someone like Simon R. Green. But if it's a hard science fiction anthology, I'm not going to ask Simon because he doesn't write those kinds of stories. I will ask somebody else. So you have to be widely read and be familiar with the authors who are producing quality short fiction today. And then once you get those few top names, you expand your search because you really don't want to leave out the newer, exciting voices. You don't want to, to deny the newer authors the opportunity to also share the table of contents with these, popular and best-selling writers. So it's a combination of factors. Sometimes you have an open submission window, which means anybody can send you a story, and that's extremely time consuming because you get hundreds if not thousands of submissions, so you have to really dedicate a lot of your time to wading through them to find those few gems. And sometimes you simply invite some of the newer exciting voices, and especially when I build my anthologies, I look outside of the anglosphere. I look to authors who write in other languages, and I work with translators to bring those stories to the American readers, because we never get enough of the type of fiction that is being told, and it's very different from what we're used to a lot of the time. But the type of stories that are being told in China and Ukraine and Russia and Brazil, there are storytelling traditions there that vary. They're different from ours, and so including a number of stories from those kind of places make any anthology you're working on richer and more diverse and more interesting.
Very well said, Mr. Alex. So, what inspired you to become an author?
Well, I've loved reading since I was a kid. I've been reading science fiction, devouring it, primarily in translation because I didn't speak English at the time, since about the age of 10. And much of what I was reading were translations into Russian from American, British, and French authors. So I was familiar with people like Robert Silverberg and Bob Shackley and Frederick Brown and some of the others that are sort of, authors that were much older at this point, but then so am I at this point. But I wasn't as familiar with the current Western authors at the time, but the translations, what was available were what's now considered to be the golden age of science fiction. And so I've always wanted to write. I've always wanted to tell the kind of stories that they told with my own spin on it. But I took a long time getting to it because, when we first moved, my family moved to the United States. I didn't speak a word of English. So English is my third language, and it took a long time before I felt confident enough to try and write fiction in the language that is not native to me. So I'm very glad that I ultimately took the plunge and decided to try it, because I have since been writing for well over a decade and have had many stories and books published in a variety of places, and it's a really fulfilling journey. So I'm glad that I overcame that fear.
Interesting, Mr. Alex. Can you tell us about your writing process?
It varies from project to project. Always starts with an idea. Usually it's a what if type of an idea, which is appropriate to speculative fiction, which is what we write, most of us write and listen to. So when an idea comes to me and I'm like, well, how do I tell this kind of a story? What is cool about this particular concept? And then I start thinking about it in terms of structuring the story and how it might come together. I do not actually begin writing. I do not begin typing until I know exactly how the story begins and how the story ends. Some writers are much braver than I, and they tend to just have the beginning and they just start typing and they see where the story takes them. I can't do that. I need that safety line. So as long as I know what my ending is going to be, every scene, every chapter, every interaction that I write is doing something to ultimately bring the story toward that goal. Even if I kind of go meandering a little bit along the way and discover interesting things about the story that I didn't intend to initially, which is how a lot of the more fun bits happen, like for many of the writers. Even so, ultimately, I have this beacon in the distance, and I know that like I'm journeying toward that destination. And if it's a novel or a novella or like a longer piece, there's usually several beacons. I don't know. I don't just know the ending, but I also know several of the really key points that I need to hit along the way. And so I'm kind of traveling from lighthouse to lighthouse until I reach the end of my journey.
Mr. Alex, what challenges have you faced your writing career?
Well, the greatest challenge is, of course, the language. It is still not my native language, and so there's this weird thing for people who learn English as adults, where many of us have SAT level vocabularies, but we will make third grade level mistakes every once in a while. So, for example, I've never become overly friendly with with the past perfect tense. So, like knowing when to write, he did something or he had done something. I understand intellectually what the difference is between those two, but a lot of the time when I am immersed in the writing process and I'm focusing on the storytelling, I end up using the wrong structure. So those are some annoying minor challenges, and they mean that it may take me a little bit longer than an average Anglophone writer to get this to polish the story up to the point where it's presentable. But ultimately, I feel like I benefit more than I suffer from this, because I also have the benefit of be phraseology and interesting turns of phrase that I can steal from the other languages that will sound fresh and original in English, even if they may be idiomatic in Russian or in Ukrainian.
Very well said, Mr. Alex. I want to shout out my ranking tops in the last 30 days according to my Apple charts, because in Zambia, I got on number 7. People, thank you, Zambia. Uganda at number 13. Pakistan at 20. Spain at 21. Slovenia at 42. Qatar at 49. Nigeria at 56. Chile at 68. Zimbabwe at 144. Singapore at 154. Belgium at 194, Cambodia 228, and many more. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world like Mr. Alex Schwartzman. So, Mr. Alex, which one of your books we gonna talk about today?
So my most recently published novel is a book called Kakistocracy, which is the second novel in the Conradverse Chronicles series. This is an urban fantasy novel that is humorous. So think Men in Black or the Dresden Files. This is along the lines of that. Now, this series follows a character named Conrad Brent, who is a guardian of Brooklyn. He protects the regular people of Brooklyn from magical threats, monsters, and all sorts of things that go bump in the night. But he also has a dangerous secret. He himself has no magic. He's able to use magical artifacts. He's able to perceive magic in others, and use any kind of items that are charged by other people. But he can't recharge those items himself, and he has no innate magic. So if you strip away all of his artifacts, he's helpless. So he thinks of himself as this magical Batman, as the guy who is able to, to like kind of outwit and outplan his opponents. But really, he has a lot. He's not quite at the level of Batman. He has a lot more problems to deal with, and a lot of the confidence issues that most people I think can relate to. But as the books progress, he gets to learn a lot more about his condition and why it is that he has no access to magic, while at the same time working hard to make alliances, thwart bad guys, and protect, and protect the people around him.
So, what inspired you to write your latest book?
Well, so the series has always been a love letter to my adoptive home of borough of Brooklyn. I started writing the series because I wanted to make the real locations of South Brooklyn, which is an unexplored territory. When people think Brooklyn, they really think a small sliver of it that is right across the bridge from Manhattan, with all the hipsters and like all the like sort of typical things that you see on TV or you read in books when people mention the borough of Brooklyn, when in fact Brooklyn is one of the largest city. If it was separate from New York City, it would be something like third or fourth largest city in the United States. That's how large the population of Brooklyn is, and it's a very interesting and diverse borough with patches of people from all sorts of different cultures and backgrounds that are all coexisting, and very rich history. So I wanted to tell stories that are set in the parts of Brooklyn that tourists don't usually visit, and that was the origin for the series. So I continue to do that from book to book. So this is book two already, and the characters certainly do leave Brooklyn. They go to other places, have adventures all over the city and even in other countries in the world. But primarily, it always comes down to cool locations that are absolutely based on real places, and I try to focus on that as much as possible.
Mr. Alex, can you describe the research process behind Kakistocracy?
Yes. So Kakistocracy, the word itself, I know it's a mouthful. It is a term for the form of government when the least capable or qualified people are in charge. And the reason the book is called that way, so because I was writing about a magical version of New York City, I populated it by a lot of people that are kind of based on the real larger than life New Yorkers, whether they're good guys or bad guys. For example, the bad guy in book one was very much a riff on Shkreli, who's this pharma bro guy. That's certainly not anybody's favorite here in New York or in the rest of the country. But I also had this real estate developer with with wild hair and a reality TV show, who was kind of a foil and just a side character in book one, because that was written a pretty long time ago. And then by the end of book one, and that's a part that I wrote more recently, he runs for mayor of New York City. And book two deals with the ramification of this character becoming mayor and causing all sorts of problems and headaches for the magical residents of New York City, as well as for the main character and his friends. So it is kind of ripped from the headlines, but I should also say that the book itself is not political. It is not like the Democrat versus Republican thing. The problems that the characters deal with are completely different. from the real world problems that we have. And at the same time, the book still talks about the responsibility of power. When should we accept, what people in charge are telling us, when we should fight against it, and so there's a lot of kind of these ideas and concepts that are sugar coated with humor and pop culture references.
And according to Mr. Britannica Bold, oh, how I love Conrad Brand.
So Conrad is the main character that I was talking about. He is so a lot of urban fantasy is written in first person. That's just one of the styles. Urban fantasy as a genre owes a lot to the noir novels, noir detective novels, which are also usually written in first person. And a lot of the fun part of those kind of books comes from the character's voice. So Conrad is just a really snarky, really, like opinionated New Yorker, which is sort of the sort that you would encounter, if you were to visit the city, for real. So he's much more fun for me to write because I get to just inject as much snark and as much, kind of like quip into him that as I can. So it's kind of my voice, but of course he's much braver than I, because goes out there and takes on anything from vampires and monsters to demigods.
Wow. And according to Mr. Pancake, read this and not the first. Still enjoyed. So, what are the elements that you put in the novel that make your readers glued to it?
So I try to always, and this is something that I talk about whenever I do a workshop on teaching how to write humor. I think it's really important to tell the story in a way that even when the jokes may not land for a particular reader, because humor is subjective. We all have our own unique senses of humor, and what you find funny may be different from what I find funny. So I do my best to make the books funny and to have the jokes that will land. But the really important job, of telling this kind of story is to have a compelling characters and compelling plot, and make sure that the jokes are landing. Even if the jokes are not landing for the particular reader, there is enough of an adventure story that draws them in, and they can still enjoy it, even if they don't think it's as funny as I think it is.
Before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101. So it's with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the best restaurant or five-star restaurant in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about sanitation, people, sanitation and hygiene in the kitchen. And plus, for our books are out, not only one but 12 volumes, people. Food 101, Volume 1, Basics, and 12 is only the books that you need. How to create a delicious food, available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. Mr. Alex, what is the best highlight of the novel Charistocracy?
Well, that depends on each reader individually, but for me, the best part was playing with different locations in the city and writing scenes, where the characters are just absolutely snarky and have a really fun banter. So there was this character whose name is Moira O'Leary, and she was a necromancer. She was a bad guy that was supposed to appear for just a chapter in the first book, but I had so much fun, right? Because she's basically a female version of Conrad Brent, except for while Conrad is pretty much chaotic good in terms of D&D alignment, she has no morals whatsoever. I mean, she's completely, totally immoral, and just really enjoys getting under people's skin. And so I I had so much fun writing her that I brought her back later in book one for several more chapters. And when I started planning book two, I absolutely knew that she has to be one of the main characters of book two. So perhaps the most fun for me for part of book two was to give her a bit of a redemption arc. I mean, she's still definitely a very annoying person, like annoying on purpose, but she actually has a bit of a redemption arc, and there's a good explanation of it in the second book. So that part was probably the most fun for me to write.
Indeed. So, can you share a memorable reader feedback or interaction that had significant impact on you?
So this doesn't pertain to this book because this book has come out very recently. So I haven't really gotten to interact with a lot of readers since it was published a few weeks ago. This is a novella that I wrote a number of years ago called H.G. Wells' Secret Agent, which is a steampunk alternate history humor. I had a reader come up to me at a convention and see this book on my signing table, and just absolutely light up. He recognized the book and he's like, "I read this book the week my father passed away, and it helped me get through that." And I gotta tell you, I was floored. Like I still think about that moment. It's probably the most the most flattering feedback that I've ever gotten from anybody, because it actually helped somebody who was in a really difficult situation mentally, and and dealing with grief, and reading this silly, humorous, like fun, book that's not meant to be taken that seriously, and that I just kind of wrote on a lark, actually help this person cope with it, and get through it to the point where they remember it and they associate that with something positive, and looking forward to looking forward toward the light, and not at all, like whatever's terrible thing is happening in their life. So that was by far the best reader moment I've ever had.
Definitely empowering other people make something else, make difference to the world. How do you handle criticism, both constructive and negative?
I don't mind criticism at all. I think it's important to understand that when people read books, they have a personal interaction with you. You may not be there in the room with them, but they absolutely get the chance to argue back, and kind of like have their feelings, and you're not entitled to their adoration. They may not like the book, they may find it boring, they may find it is just not quite right for them. And so uh, I think that it's important to understand that, and to accept that you cannot possibly write something that'll please everyone. If you go to Goodreads or a similar site and you pull up your absolute favorite book, or pull up something that is undoubtedly considered a classic, like maybe books by Shakespeare, or anything that's being taught in schools and colleges, all of those books have one-star reviews, right? There are people who will read Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet and just go like, nope, that's not for me. So who are we to expect that our books will do better than that? So when people have a negative experience with a book, just have to shrug and move on and continue writing. And if you happen to actually have read that review and they say something that strikes a chord with you, and you actually think that the criticism is useful and you can do better, then you try to do better. But ultimately, you have to tell the stories that you want to tell, and if those stories are good, they will find their readership, and they will find a lot more people who will enjoy them than the number of people who will have negative things to say about them.
Well done, Mr. Alex. How do you approach character development in Kakistocracy?
Well, so a lot of the characters are characters that we've already seen in book one, so that actually makes the job of the author much easier when they're working on sequels. They already have fully fleshed out, developed, interesting characters, and they're continuing to just put them through the meat grinder, and like force them into situations where they get to grow as people, and deal with adversity, deal with difficult situations. So again, the biggest character development arc of the book is the one I already told you about for Moira O'Leary, but certainly other characters are also growing, and like learning more about themselves. I mean, the whole series is kind of Conrad's story, where he starts out thinking that the most important thing in the world is for him to figure out why he doesn't have magic while everybody else does, and to get it, to become to become a real boy, to become just like everybody else in this magical community. But as the series continues and as he grows, he realizes that that's not the most important thing by far, and that his relationship with people around him and with the community around him is far more important than his actual power level, or what or what magic he's able to perform. So I think that that's something that readers can understand and kind of connect to, as long as the way that I go about telling those stories is compelling.
Kakistocracy. Which chapter did you enjoy the most writing?
So there's a couple of ones that come to mind, and I think I'm going to talk about one where Conrad and Moira go into the land under the mound, which is the land of the Fae, because he has to basically own up to something that he has done that wronged the entire Fae realm. And in order to kind of like make that excuse, he ends up involved in an equivalent of a rap battle with a Fae prince, except for it's a rap battle to the death. So, and they're not rapping, they're comparing their memories and experiences. So that was a really fun, that was a really fun chapter to write, because since they're doing this competition where they're comparing their personal experiences, and it gives me an opportunity to give some of the highlights of what happened in book one and before with this character, and this is early in the book, without making it seem like I'm just rehashing. But it's also just a really fun, cool concept to put your character through, and that was having that entire side trip to the land of the Fae was just a blast to write.
So, which chapter do you have struggles writing with?
That's an interesting question. I'm trying to think of. I don't think that there's a specific chapter that was a problem. The problem was I have a lot of different subplots that are going on in the book, and I was worried that there may be too many and the readers may find it distracting. So the struggle was to make the mix of them just right, to be able to figure out how to connect the different storylines and the different quests that the main character is forced to deal with throughout the book in a way that feels organic. And I believe that I've ultimately succeeded, even though it took some work, because the reader feedback so far has been positive. And I've actually asked a few of the people I know who read the book if they felt like there was too much going on, and none of them said that that was an issue. So I feel confident that while it was a concern for me and I did work to address it, perhaps that extra work paid off.
Very well said, Mr. Alex, and thank you so much for being the number 2 of the 100 best book podcasts on the planet, and number 1 in the art book category. Thank you so much. And of course, listen notes for my latest listen score of 26 and belong to 10% popular show globally. Mr. Alec, how has the publishing process been?
The publishing process is always tough. And I think most people don't quite realize how slow and how often frustrating it can be. They see movies about writers, and in the movie, there's this writer who is sitting in their $3 million Connecticut home and like typing and then maybe writing like one book every few years and just sending it off to their agent or their publisher, and it magically comes out and sells tons and tons of copies. The real world is not quite like that. You have to work very hard for everything. And, there are a tremendous number of talented people with great manuscripts, and they're all competing for a fairly small number of slots on the publishing schedule for the top tier publishers in order to get published. So I've been very, very fortunate. My publisher is Arkman or Kasich, and they're kind of like smaller and scrappier, but they're very good at what they do, and they've been extremely supportive. So I've had probably a much better experience than most when it comes to the publication of my novels. But even with their schedule, from the time I submit the completed book to them to the time it comes out and the reader gets to see it, it's about a year. And if you think that that's a bad thing, for some of the bigger publisher, it's more like 2 to 2.5 years.
Oh, wow. So, Mr. Alex, what will be your inspiring message for those aspiring writers out there?
The best thing to do is to write the kind of stories that you yourself would enjoy. I write for myself. I write because it amuses me. And if it amuses me, then I know that it'll amuse my readers because they self-select, right? They try my books, and if they like them, they continue reading them, which means that this material works for them. And if they absolutely hate it, they probably will not pick up my next book, so I don't have to worry about them as much. So my main audience member is myself. So I write to amuse myself, and I think that that's what everybody should be doing. Do not write to the latest trend. Do not write because something that you think, well, I'll write this because it's going to sell, or I'll write this because it has a better chance of landing me an agent, etc. Don't do that. Tell the story you're passionate about. Tell the story that is interesting to you, and that way you have an opportunity to produce something that is unique and is in your voice. Is not It's not in the voice of a popular writer that you're trying to emulate or anything else. And ultimately, you will be happier and much more satisfied with this result.
Yes, indeed, people, and stop procrastinating. Go for it. If you have the passion of writing, go, go, go. Probably you are the best in the making, like Mr. Alex Schwartzman. So, Mr. Alex, what is the most rewarding aspect of being an author?
I mean, being able to finish the story and look at the manuscript and kind of go like, "Wow, I worked for 6 months or 9 months or however long it took, and I got that entire book out of me that didn't exist before," is extremely rewarding. And the second thing is meeting the readers, being able to go to conventions and book signings and science fiction conferences and just interact with the readers and hear how, what they thought of the book, how they interacted with it. It is an extremely rewarding thing, and it definitely gives me that fuel to keep going, like you said, to keep, but like, because it's hard, right? Even if you're a professional writer, it's hard to get yourself to the computer and get this, not stop distracting yourself with social media and listening to really cool podcasts like yours and doing all this other stuff, watching Netflix, and instead just sit down at the computer. It's just you and the keyboard, and write that book. It's difficult, and when you get those interactions, that feedback, it kind of propels you like fuel to get you to keep going and help you get that next book out, and it's a self perpetuating process.
Yes, inspired yourself is something else. So, Mr. Alex, lastly, where can our listeners find more about you and your work?
So my website is just my name, alexschwartzman.com. On my website, there are samples from both The Middling Affliction, which is the first book in the series, and Kakistocracy. There's also links to a lot of my short stories, many of which are available to read online for free, and all sorts of additional information, as well as my blog, which talks about the conventions that I'm about to attend, the new releases, etc. So that's the best place to start. But also, you can find my books in wherever you shop for books, and at Amazon, at Barnes and Noble, whatever bookstores you go to, Audible. So pretty much, my job is to make it as convenient as possible, and my publisher's job, of course, as well, to make it as convenient as possible for people to get their hands on the books. So not to make it difficult. So whatever format you like, whatever bookshop you prefer, get it from there. If you want to get it from the library, get it from the library. No author will be upset if you borrow their book from the library instead of buying it. We're just going to be happy that you're reading it.
Definitely. So, people, let's support Mr. Alex Shvartsman because if you support him, more books to come. So, Mr. Alex, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Bodycam people, see you soon.